All right, amigos, I'm Jared Evanition, and welcome back to the NextDay Nomad Podcast, where every week I will bring you the most valuable tips to becoming location independent. Whether it's talking to other digital entrepreneurs, industry leaders in remote work, or my expert advice on how you can achieve freedom. So grab that boarding pass and buckle up, baby, because it's time to create your life full of freedom and adventure. Let's go. Life moves at you pretty fast. And if you don't stop to look around once in a while, you could miss it. And that's Ferris Bueller. And that's so important because time can pass us by rather quickly, especially when you're caught up in the daily grind. And actually, did you know that the chances of you being here as a human being and living this life, this gift called life, you have a 1 in 400 trillion chance. And this number is considered as a scientific fact because of the chances of your parents meeting at the time that they did, the probability of them actually having children. It really is a miracle when you actually break down the science of it. And that you or I or any of the 7 billion people currently on this planet living and breathing, we now live this life where we're not meant to live the way that we're told to live it. We're meant to live it the way we should live it, the way that we feel it, the way that we want to experience it. You're not meant to live life on anybody else's terms but your own. So those seeking to escape the rat race because it's a call to break from routine or savor the moment is something essential when traveling or seeking more spontaneous, fulfilling lifestyle outside of that typical 9 to 5. We should emphasize the importance of pausing to appreciate the little things in life and the life's little experiences, which is often what leads people to pursue travel or that nomadic lifestyle. Because we get bored, we get complacent, we get sick of that mundane lifestyle. And if you're looking for depth or meaning of new experiences away from that familiar pressure of everyday life, then maybe this podcast will be for you. Welcome back to the NextDay Nomad Podcast. I'm your host, Jared Evanition, and today I'm joined by content creator and product manager, Kimberly Bueno. She is a product manager for fintech companies with over 8 years of experience, and Kimberly is originally from California, and she's been traveling for 4 years working remotely, and currently she is in Da Nang, Vietnam, where I'm currently located, and we just recently met at a coffee shop when I was caught her filming some content, and I just had to say hello. So Kimberly, welcome to the show. I'm excited that you're here. And since we've obviously got on the phone here or on the call here, I learned so much about the fact that you also work in tech like I do, and you were in recruitment. So this conversation is going to go off the wall a little bit because we've got so much in common, and I think we're going to have a great chat.
1000%. And thanks so much for having me, Jared. I'm super excited to do this podcast with you.
Me too. So, but let's first, maybe just give me give all the audience a shameless plug of who you are, what you do, and just maybe take us through, your journey and your content page.
Yeah, sure. So, like Jared said, my name is Kimberly. I am a travel content creator, so I like to post long form videos of my travels and the food that I eat. Sometimes I like to do some food challenges on YouTube, and I also post on Instagram and TikTok. And the whole concept that I'm trying to push out is that I take the audience along with me on my travels, and if someone who's watching is not able to go to that specific location or area, they at least feel like they're traveling with me. So I'm still trying to figure out what that looks like. But my background has been working in product management. I started my career working in finance and traditional banking and recruitment and HR. And I was the person who was recruiting candidates, and then I became the person who was firing people. And then I transitioned over to tech and Web3 and AI, where I started doing product management. And that has been amazing. I love product management. I still do it from time to time. I have a consulting business where I do it as a contractor, and I handle business operations, stuff like that. But I kind of have a wide breadth of various experiences amongst a lot of industries, but my love has always been in creating content. And I think that just comes from my childhood of like being an entertainer and performer. And I think I'm just trying to dive more into that. So that's kind of a little bit about me and like my background.
That's cool. So when you say performer or entertainer, what was that? What did that entail?
So I was in theater. I did
Okay.
a little bit of theater. I sang, danced, act. I'm Filipino, so um, when you're a Filipino, right? Like there's like a saying that you Filipinos buy a karaoke machine before they buy a house, and they're also like they are so talented, so they like can do pretty much anything.
Yeah.
Like when it comes to entertaining, and so as a Filipina, I have to live up to that name sometimes.
It's so interesting because like when now that I'm learning more, obviously like because when we met in that coffee shop, we briefly spoke. I obviously just saw you shooting content. I'm like, hey, you know what? I think that I want to get a content creator that's actually in Da Nang on my podcast as well. But I was also an actor. I was an actor for 8 years in Vancouver.
Whoa, that's
Yeah,
so cool. We have
yeah.
too much in common. That's so crazy. So like how you started this podcast, we were clearly meant to meet.
Yeah, yeah. So it's funny how things happen because like I spent 8 years. I left my sales career back in 2014, 2015 and moved to Vancouver and like restarted everything to pursue an acting career that I had always wanted to do since I was a kid and spent 8 years doing it, auditioning, working on set. So and Vancouver is like Hollywood North, right? So like they film a lot of stuff there, and they film so many things there that you wouldn't actually know that are filmed in Vancouver, but they are. But I just then I left that because it was just not for me anymore. It wasn't aligning with my values. It wasn't aligning with the lifestyle that I wanted, and I felt like I was just confined to that restriction location. So, which is why I when I that's one of the things I gave up to pursue a remote location independent life. So it was one of the things that I had to like it was the last thing that I had to like say goodbye to in order to live that remote life. So, but yeah, it's
Mm.
pretty interesting. Now that you say that you did performing and all that kind of stuff. It's yeah, this conversation is going to be a lot more interesting than I originally had thought, which is obviously a great thing because I knew we were going to have a great conversation. So,
Yeah.
but like what when you obviously let's start off with the tech stuff because obviously we can get into the content stuff because but I'd like to maybe dive into that a little later. But what started the remote work that like when you obviously been traveling for 4 years? What was the thing that kind of drove you to that idea? Hey, you know what? I want to work and travel the world at the same time because it's different for everybody, and I want people to see how. I mean, you and I are just very normal people, just like everyday people that I'm sure you get the question from a lot of your friends or colleagues, how do you do this lifestyle? So what drove you to that? And then how do you keep that afloat?
Yeah. So I didn't know about remote working until maybe like 2016. Sorry. Um, and or yeah, 2016 is when I first found out about remote working. And I remember watching videos of like people on YouTube who were remote working. And this is pre-COVID, right? So it was
Hmm.
very new to me and I was very intrigued by it, but it wasn't actually until after COVID where I started thinking about like I really during COVID I was so I was living in New York for about 10 years. So I was in New York and I was like, I really can't be like at home anymore, especially when things are opening up. Um, and I thought to myself, like, okay, this is like the opportunity for me, now that my work is remote, for me to try to figure out what's the best way for me to actually work remote and travel around the world. Um, and be, and the problem with like living in New York is that you're paying really expensive rent, right? I was fortunate enough that I was able to negotiate a really, really good apartment for a really, really good deal. Like because I'm sure you know this because you're in recruitment, right? So I became a really good negotiator. And I thank my HR skills for that. So when I found this apartment in New York, it was originally listed for about $8,000, and then during COVID, it went down to 6,000, and then because it was still open, it went down to 4,200, and then I negotiated for 3,000 for 2 years. And this apartment, I just have to talk about it because this apartment had an in-washer unit, dishwasher, a balcony, and it was like right on the seaport. And so when I was living there, it was really difficult because you're paying like a significant amount of money to go off and travel and also be paying rent, right? Like $3,000 is a big chunk of money. Granted, I was sharing it with my ex at the time, but that's still a big chunk of money that you have to allocate just for rent alone. So when the 2 years was up, I basically made the decision of like, the 3,000 that I'm spending on this rent could be utilized for much more. It could be utilized for airfare. It could be utilized for cheaper accommodations. Like, in Bangkok, Thailand, you can find an apartment for $400, maybe even less, right? In Da Nang, Vietnam, right? We could probably find something similar or even cheaper. So in my head, I tried to calculate exactly what were the expenses that I needed to have when I travel, and like what part of my life right now do I need to kind of rearrange and allocate so that way I can afford that lifestyle. So the biggest changing factor for me was getting rid of my New York apartment. And that was like a big leap into remote. So I made that decision when the 2 years was up because I think what also helped is that they also increased the rent for it. They went from 3,000 and back up to 7,000. So that was like an easy out for me. But I think for anyone who's interested in jumping into remote work, it's just asking yourself, are you willing to like leave your home base for a potentially much more affordable lifestyle where you can also travel and use your money for other things, other experiences?
It's so interesting too, because people, when the things you listed about your apartment in New York, people don't realize that that's a real luxury for a New York style apartment, because apartments in New York are rather small. They're not super big. And I'll be honest, I've never been to New York. It's on my list to go. I've got friends in New York. I know. I've never been, and it's crazy. I've had opportunities to go. I was gonna go to do some theater stuff in New York at one point, and
Wow.
that's when COVID hit. I was actually scheduled to go in the early part of, like, I think it was like end of Q1, early Q2 for of 2020, and then the pandemic hit, and so then obviously had to readjust my plans, and then I started to kind of slowly get out of acting. But that was, so I haven't been yet, but I've got a few friends there, and it's on my list because I'm a big sports fan. I love the Yankees. I was really, really, really want to see New York. So I've never been, but I do know that New York apartments, having those things are a luxury, because you
Yeah.
don't necessarily, I've seen apartments and how tiny they can be, and for $3,000. And there's actually another content creator that I follow who talks about his experience of living in New York, now living in Bangkok. I don't know if you've come across him, Paul Lee, and he's on YouTube. He's doing very well on YouTube. He's been in Bangkok, I think, for 4 years, showcasing his lifestyle. But he talked about how much he was paying for rent in New York versus what he's paying in Bangkok for a year, and it's like an astronomical difference. But the amenities you get is incredible. So when you can find that way to become remote, and you can lower that cost, I mean, it's absolutely incredible. I just did a big post on this actually not too long ago, in about how this couple from Australia living in Sydney, their rent skyrocketed in price, and they ended up moving to Bali, and they're saving $40,000 a year in Australian dollars, which I think is around 25,000 a year US. And they're saving about $25,000 a year US on rent just by living in Bali, which is incredible. And you're in a different part, you're in a more relaxed like environment. So when you do figure that out, it makes a lot of sense that if you can find a way to work remotely, take advantage of it.
Yeah.
And so when you started your journey, where did you end up going? Where was the first place that you packed your bags and you said see you later, New York, and
Oh my
hello,
gosh.
new destination?
It was Mexico City.
Nice.
So I also travel with the dog. So I don't have my dog
Okay.
with me in Vietnam, but um, Mexico City was like a city that I had been to before. But this was like me essentially like moving my life to Mexico
Hmm.
City and then using that as a starting point. And the reason being is because I think Mexico City is an incredibly good remote friendly starter pack type of deal, right? Like you don't
100%.
necessarily need to know Spanish. It's helpful, but
Yeah.
I was walking through La Condesa and I
Yeah.
was like, this is Brooklyn. I am not in Mexico. This is everyone speaking English, like perfect
Mhm.
English. And I'm like, I feel weird being here because it doesn't feel like Mexico to me. But I think it's such a great way for people to start, um, just to get a feel of like, how do you stay aware of your surround. I mean, I'm a woman, so I kind of feel like I have to be a little bit more aware of my surroundings, but I think like it's a great way to just start traveling, working remote. There's tons of great cafes. I think there's a huge digital nomad community there, and like I think it's a great way to just make your transition slowly. So I started in Mexico City, and then I made my way down to South America, and I did a whole like 6 month like trip around there, and that was amazing. I loved it.
That's so cool. And like I've been to Mexico City as well, and I stayed in La Condesa, Roma area. And you're right. Like there's such a vibe to it. Like you don't even feel like you're in Mexico. It is like
Yeah,
it's just like the parks, everything. It's so much greenery. And I went to kind of Mexico. I like to go to places a little blind sometimes. I can not really understand where I'm going.
yeah,
And I went to Mexico City. Oh goodness. This would have been around 2018, I think I went. And I was only there for like 3 4 days. I decided when I was coming home from Mexico I wanted to see Mexico City, so I increased my layover over there. And when I got there though, I noticed how it was not at all what I had ever imagined it to be like. Like it was very high end. That area especially very high end. And there is lots of cafes. And even in 2018, I noticed a lot of people in the coffee shops working from their laptops. And I was still acting and working in restaurants at the time, so remote work wasn't even on my radar. But I just thought it was like such a cool little spot, and the nightlife was in very vibrant, but not like in like that traditional like beach town Mexican way. Like it was very elegant, like nice cocktail bars. People really like a lot of class there, and I can't wait to go back. It is on the list to go back. My wife hasn't been there. Um, but how long have you spent did you spend in Mexico City?
So I actually only spent a month in there because
Yeah.
I told myself I liked it so much. I think it
Yeah.
was like a month or a month and a half. And I loved it so much. I had a boxing trainer. It's where I like really got into boxing. I um had like a personal trainer. I had everything. And I told myself, if I don't leave Mexico City, I will not see the rest of the world because I just loved it so much. It was definitely it was one of the few countries that I considered actually like living
Yeah.
there for a longer period of time. So I forced myself. I was like, I have to leave Mexico City. It was
Yeah.
just, it had to happen.
Yeah, and like so would you say that you're more of a traveler that likes to go place to place, or do you like to have a home base and then travel from your home base?
So I would say I typically like to travel and not have a home base. Asia is actually the only um, like country that I like feel like I have to have a home base because it's a little bit harder to travel with a dog. So in South
Yes.
America and in Europe, it's so easy. Like it's you don't even. I mean, it's not easy, but it's not as difficult as Asia, where you
Yeah.
really like. There's a lot of countries that don't allow dogs, and they're very strict on how to like when to when to come into the country with your dog.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's like really long quarantines, and also um, there's just been like horror stories I've heard of people who like travel to certain
Hmm.
parts where I just don't want to have that amount of stress. So Asia's like the only area where I've had like home base, which I don't know if I'm a fan of. I think I prefer traveling and just taking everything
Hmm.
with me and going to that new country. So it's definitely new to me to have like a home base outside of the US.
Yeah, and for me, it's different because I find I'm when I'm on the go, and I learned this in Europe this summer, is not having a home base. We traveled, I think, 8 countries in 12 weeks or something, or 6 countries in 12
Wow.
weeks. And so it was on the go a lot. But I found like my productivity for work like just took a nosedive because you're constantly on the move, and I felt like I was burning myself out. So, but like in last winter, we spent 6 months in the Dominican, and and that was amazing.
Yeah.
And my productivity was good because now that I'm here, we have our home base is in Da Nang, obviously for at least the next 3 months, and then we're looking at extending, and then we got the multi-entry, so we can come and go and travel. And I find that that's probably more my vibe, just because I find that if I'm on the go so much, it's you're out exploring all day every day because you're only in that place for such a short period, but then my work hours are late at night, and so it's been it was really challenging at the start. So now we're just like, let's just stay in one spot, we can be more productive, and then we can travel on weekends, or Fridays and Mondays kind of thing, and just do it that way. So it really is, it's not a one size fits all. You just kind of learn what works for you. And so I've always asked that question, like what works for other people, because I think it's important, because I think people get this, how do you do this and manage your time and do all, it's like you can do it so many different ways and work it around your own schedule. So I think that's really interesting. And then um, and then did you go back to the US, or have you been doing pretty much 4 years consistently of travel?
So when I first started, I went back to the US several times. And then actually 2 years ago, I just got like a storage unit. And like,
Hmm.
because before we were just the first 2 years I was traveling with my ex, and then the last 2 years I've been traveling by myself, and so I just got a storage unit and just have all my stuff there. Um, and I would say this year or I haven't been to the US within like the last 6 months.
Okay.
So it's been,
Okay.
this is probably the longest time I haven't gone back to the US, because normally I'll go back to the US to like pick up some stuff from my storage unit, to get some clothes for like certain climates. But because Asia's so far, right, it's a little bit more, you kind of have to be a little bit more smart about when you go back to the
Yes,
US and use it like use that timing pretty efficiently. Um,
absolutely.
but actually, something you mentioned about travel, because I agree with you. I know people, I consider myself a slow traveler. I never go to a place unless I'm just visiting, like for a week. I never
Yeah.
stay at a place normally for at least a month. I find that a month minimum is normally my go to. I'm actually only in Da Nang for a short period of time just because I have friends here that I wanted to say hi to. But um, I find that I've met other digital nomads who can just be at a place for like 2 3 days and then go to the next place, and that just sounds so stressful to me. Like
Yeah.
I can see how the productivity would not be, at least for me, uh effective, because like you're pretty much packing, unpacking, packing, unpacking, and that could just get that's a little time consuming in itself. So that could be super stressful for me, I think.
Yeah, and especially when like I recruit, I have a podcast, and I've launched a new business as well, called the NextDay
Oh,
Nomad Academy. So it's like I've got like so many things. Like it's my productivity level needs to be like optimized to like a highest level.
yeah.
Otherwise, it's just, and then also too, it's like, when you're doing all these things and owning a business and doing podcasting, I wouldn't say I'm a content creator on your level, but I mean, at the end of the day, I'm still a content creator that I still need to showcase the lifestyle to draw people in. So it's, yeah, it gets to be quite a bit, and you only have so many hours in a day. I actually just recently hired my first VA,
Wow,
just to kind of
congrats.
take, yeah, thank you. So just to kind of like take that a little bit of a load off of on my shoulders, because I do all my editing of my podcast myself. I do all my editing of my social media. Like it's, and then on top of that, like I'm interviewing candidates like daily, late at night. So it's, yeah, it can get to be a little bit much. So, and then on top of that, we decided we're doing 75 hard right now.
Oh my
So we
God, me
have like,
too.
are you?
Oh my God, that is so funny. Wait, that is so crazy. Oh my God,
Yeah.
I'm like day 21 and I'm like, oh, I don't even know how
Yeah.
I'm doing it.
Look, hold on. I'm going to show you something on the computer here. You said day 21.
Yeah.
Hold on. I'm on day 22.
Whoa. Wait, that's actually insane. This entire
Yeah.
conversation is like freaking
Yeah.
me out. That's so crazy.
It's pretty wild because like I found that, and it's been good. I went all of Europe without having, I did 12 weeks in Europe not having a sip of alcohol. I'm not a big drinker as it is anyway. I did no sugar, none of those things over the course of 12 weeks in Europe. And now here it's like I wanted to just like find a way to like focus and just be, so adding that extra element has been super challenging, but like in one of the best ways possible. Now, how have you found that challenge doing that while you're traveling and kind of navigating through that process?
It's been tough. So I'm actually I might so I don't drink alcohol. I don't drink soda. I have been soda fast food free for about 3-4 years.
Good
Um,
for you.
so that's been easy. What I added to my 75 hard, because I was like, well, I kind of don't drink alcohol anyways. And I don't necessarily do all those things. I removed my vices, basically the things that I loved, and it was popcorn, ice cream, and cake.
Yeah,
I'm not a huge sweet person, but like when it comes to desserts and sweets, those are my things. Like
yeah,
I removed pastries, like anything like sweet. The only exception I made here in Vietnam is I stopped drinking caffeine or coffee specifically for like about like 8 months. But I wanted to try the coffee here. So I was like, okay, I'll drink coffee. And because they have some sugar in it, I just let myself be like, okay, it's fine. But
yeah.
I'm not eating any of like the pastries that they have. I've seen this cafe that has fluffy pancakes and I want to eat the pancakes, but I can't. So,
Yeah.
there's like, I'm a foodie, so I'm kind of like struggling with that as well. Um, but what's nice is that I get to focus on protein. So like
Yeah.
there's a lot of meat here, so I love just consuming that instead.
Yeah. Have you, so, and the coffee is great here. And to be quite honest with you, like we can even talk about some of the food here because I think it's honestly it's incredible. And like, and not only that too, and I even just on the podcast episode that I'm releasing today was with one of my good friends who's actually in Bangkok, and we talked about how the prices of food and just like the quality of food is just like
Oh,
out of this world compared to what we're used to. And like
yeah.
we're from the same place, like the Canada, America, it's the same place. Like we have the same standards for the most part. But I think that, have you had one of those coffees called the egg coffee yet? Have you heard of that here?
Yes, it is my one of my favorites. I think it is my favorite. Actually, I was telling a
It's
friend last night.
incredible.
It's so
Yeah.
good. It's so good.
It's
And I want to keep drinking it. I finished mine in like 2 seconds. I have a problem. Like I really
yeah,
can't like resist. And so
it's
yeah,
so good.
it's
It's
so good.
it's incredible, and like everything you go, and I find that the quality of everything is just, there's so much love into it. And if you go into the bakeries, like there's some really, and actually one of my good friends is here right now too. He's in Da Nang. He's been here for 3 months, and we were talking about this the other day. Like you go into the coffee shop, and so in Canada we have obviously Tim Hortons is our bread and butter for coffee shops. It's, I don't really like it too much. It's not my jam. And obviously in the US it's Starbucks for most people. They love their Starbucks. And Starbucks is obviously a lot nicer than Tim Hortons in terms of aesthetic, but then you look at the coffee shops here, like Highlands Coffee, which is everywhere, and you go inside of it and you see the quality of the coffee and the pastries and the food, but then also the quality of their environment and like how nice and clean and aesthetically like comforting it is. And you almost come to Vietnam and you're like, you don't expect to see the things that you expect. And you're just kind of blown away by everything in terms of this is like I don't know if it's their national coffee chain because I've never heard it before. If it's like if it is like their Starbucks, even though there is Starbucks here, but you almost get taken by surprise because it's not at all what I anticipated it to be. And then you have some of the foods from some of these restaurants all along the beach that are, and it's some of the best food I've ever tasted in my life. And whether it's American food or if it's Vietnamese food or any other international food, the quality is just so top notch. I've never felt so light in my life eating the food that I have here because
Yeah.
I don't feel like they cook with a lot of those additives and whatnot. But I don't know how have you found that? You're a foodie, so you've eaten this is what you kind of document on your channel is you document the foods and do food challenges. Like how have you found the food in Vietnam compared to other places in the world versus the US as well?
Oh, well, this is controversial because for a couple things, just because since I am currently based in Thailand, I personally do not like Thailand food. Vietnamese food is up there for me. I love Vietnamese food purely because I think Vietnamese food has a lot of veggies in it. It's very easy
Hmm.
to find like healthy options. And not a lot of like fried foods. Now,
Hmm.
actually, I have lost about 40 to 50 pounds over the past 2 years. I used to
Good for
weigh close to
you.
200 pounds, and I've lost a significant amount of weight throughout my travels. And one thing I will say, I did gain a little bit of weight last year when I was in New York, and I noticed that I dropped like I was able to drop weight pretty quickly once I started traveling around Asia. And I think it's
Hmm.
because of, like what you said, like the ingredients. Like I notice when I'm eating in the US, it's like I can feel myself like be like stuffed and really heavy just from the meals that I have. I also notice that there's like a lot of cuisine that is very heavy based or cream based or like there's just a lot more processed foods.
Yeah.
Whereas here, you see them make the food. There's a lot of fruits, there's a lot of vegetables. You see so many different options, and they're not, and I would say the portions are pretty like small too compared to the US, which, I think as someone who's on a weight loss journey, right, I think portions is really important to like how you lose weight, right, to be in calorie deficit. And so I think there's like a lot of differences between US and just traveling in general. I think that's across the board. Now, I think with Vietnam and other countries, I love that Vietnam has more of a focus on non-fried foods, at least in my opinion. I think that in Bangkok specifically, if I'm going to compare the two, I find it's very difficult for me to find a lot of fresh veggies in Bangkok. I go to the same restaurants all the time, whereas here in Da Nang or even Hoi An, right, I'm able to just find so many different options, and I think that's more attractive to me.
Yeah, and I think and I think I noticed the same thing over the course of the winter when I went back to Canada for Christmas and I was there for November, December. And I noticed the same thing. I felt I felt way more heavier and I felt like like I felt just everything just didn't feel right. And it's very similar because we have like there's a lot more preservatives and additives to the foods that you buy and the foods that you and everything's kind of done for convenience. But then here it's just different. I find that things are more whole food. And I noticed that in Bali too. When I was in Bali in Canggu, same thing. The foods were just so whole foods and like leafy greens, like solid
Yeah.
vegetables, and and it just in the meat was nice and lots of just like a very a lot of protein, like protein heavy diets and protein heavy foods, no matter what it is you're looking for. So that's been a big thing for me as well. But I want to ask you about when you started your journey, and you obviously take yourself back to that initial part where you wanted to become remote. What skills did you feel like you needed to learn? Because I feel like a lot of people in the audience and just people out there that are, they just don't know where to start. They don't know what to do. But like, how close do you think did you realize you were to being remote without knowing how, until you actually got into the remote work? Because did you have those skills? Did you have to learn new skills? Like, what was that for you?
Yeah, so something I didn't mention is, so I'm a Google Women Tech Maker. So I do career coaching. I used to do career coaching as a side gig as well. Um, and how I normally coach clients is I tell them, like, write a list of all your current skills and then write a list of jobs that you want to do. And I normally take them along with me, and I ask them, okay, so out of all the skills that you can do, which one do you do what really, really well? And then of all the skills that of all the jobs that you want to do, are there any similarities amongst that? Because oftentimes we don't really know, like, it's hard for me to picture, like, oh,
Mhm.
that at that time, did I know that my entry point into product management would be project management, right? Like, a lot of people don't know the differences. I think the best thing to do is to identify skill set, identify jobs that are in remote working industries, or can be done remote. And you can start off small, right? Like, it could be a job that you're not interested in, but maybe you just know there are remote jobs. For example, copywriting. Like, what jobs can be done without having to go into office? Because remote working can be not the same amongst industries, right? Like, one industry might be really known to have like good remote working conditions, but then there's other companies that don't necessarily do that. I think hybrid is really coming up a lot, and I personally don't like that. I like remote completely, but so I think taking someone alongside and just trying to help them identify, like, what jobs are they interested in that can be done remote, and starting there. I think project management is like a really good skill to have, and you could easily get a certificate through Google. I think it's like Google certificates site, or I think there might be another site, but I got a project management certificate that way to get into product management. And then I became like a Scrum Master. I did all these certificates to help me make sure that I have like the top skills to become a good product manager, and specifically then look for roles that were remote that way. So I'm a huge believer in project management as a skill set, because it's almost interchangeable in different roles, right? Like, you have to be organized, you have to be able to communicate to stakeholders, you have to be able to organize yourself in a way that you can track and manage projects. And I think in almost every single role, regardless of what kind of position you are, whether it's an engineer or recruiter, you have to be able to organize yourself in a way where you can manage your own personal projects in that specific role. So I think, like, project management is an excellent skill for anyone to take on, and you could easily get a certificate for that and get
No,
certified.
that's interesting too, because you mentioned that you coach, and that's similar to what I actually just launched a free course for people, because one of the things that I think people, if they don't have those skill sets to get, maybe they've never worked in like that professional setting, right? Like, where they can find that remote work that kind of suits them. What my program does is, it starts off with a mindset challenge where they can really build that entrepreneur mindset, because everything does start right there. That's the foundation of everything. And number two is the kind of very similar. I get them to go through and a job history, but write down all the skills that they did in that job, soft skills and hard skills, rate them out of 10, and kind of prioritize them to in importance to them. Like, do they enjoy it? Do they enjoy that skill? Do they enjoy that aspect of their job, or do they not? And then from that inventory, I then list the top 10 online service-based businesses because maybe they're not equipped for a remote job because they don't have the experience to kind of get into that job, and you're competing against so many people that might have that experience. But what they can do, and also too, I'll touch base on this remote work, and I've learned this the hard way, is there's a lot of restrictions with remote work. You can't leave the US, can't leave your province, can't leave your state, etc., because just from legality purposes. But I'll touch base on that later. So what I did is I took the top 10 online service-based businesses, and we'll use copywriting or virtual assisting or even coaching for an example. Those businesses are absolutely taking off right now in 2024 and 2025. And so I list all the required skills needed to be successful in those businesses, where they can then go and cross-reference their skills ladder and look at where they're at, what they need, and does their hobbies and their passions align in that field, that they can kind of create something around that base point and realize, hey, I'm actually closer than I think, and I can create myself a slow exit from the 9 to 5 and work for myself and be in full control of my career. So I think that's really interesting, because I think that even what you're doing is so good, because people don't necessarily know how to evaluate themselves. They really don't know how to look at themselves and be like, hey, do I actually like this? Am I good at this? And I think people just need that little push to like really understand what it is they're actually really good at. And I use one of the people that I use the most as an example is restaurant servers. They're some of the most talented people on the planet, because one, they're really good at selling, good at multitasking. And one of the things that they're stuck in is they're stuck in that rat race because they're the most location dependent people on the planet in a lot of ways, because their whole job revolves around them being in a restaurant. It's not like they can go travel, and sure, the money's great, but at some point they realize, what next? Like, how long can I do this job for? Like, I'm good at it, but can I do this job into my 40s, into my 50s? And if the answer is no, they start to panic and think like, well, what else can I do to replicate that amazing money that I make? So that's kind of the idea behind the NextDay Nomad, kind of the academy, is to kind of showcase people that, your everyday life and the skills and hobbies that you do consistently have made you even more closer than you think to starting your own business and something that you're actually passionate about.
Yeah, 1000%. And I completely agree with you on like hostesses. I've met so many people who work at restaurants that they think that they don't have the skills, and then when you start asking them questions, and then you start like, I mean, I like to probe them and like just have them talk me through what they do on a day-to-day basis. And then we start to build out their resume, and I'm like, look at all the skills that you actually do that you're just not thinking about, right? Like it's anytime I'm helping someone with their resume, I just have them like talk me through, and then we go from what they thought they didn't have in terms of skill sets, or they just thought they didn't have the experience, to a resume where they're like, okay, they start to build a little bit of confidence, and you start to see that like they can actually, make this transition from, a restaurant job to a remote job.
Yeah, and so and then to touch base, and I agree with that, and then to touch base on the second point of that, where I said like about remote work having restrictions. Like, have you run into those problems with yourself in your career, where, because like I obviously in recruitment, I see a lot of that where, I'm working with a client, I want to find them, I'm working with a candidate, and they're like, I'm really looking for a remote job. And then we find them that remote job, but the remote job but must be located in California, must be located in Nevada. And they can't actually take their work outside of that state or that province, because there is that chance they might need to go on site. Like, have you found that an issue for yourself in your career as you're kind of navigating to remote work or going through remote work?
Yeah, I actually have never encountered that problem.
Which
In
is nice.
fact, I think a lot of the jobs are like, yeah, we don't care.
Which is awesome.
Yeah, which is great, I'm very fortunate to have that experience. I have heard of people who have remote jobs and they have to go back to the States every once in a while. But I haven't, and I've met a couple of people who when I met them during my travels, they have a job where it's like they have to be within the States for like 6 months, working, and then after those 6 months they can be outside of the US, like, kind of
Yeah.
almost like vacation. But I haven't been in a situation where the rule requires you to be, it's remote, but you have to be in like a state or a province.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. And so now what would your thoughts be on the return to office that's been going on in the US, like big companies like Amazon, like return to office, like how, like I'm blown away by it, to be quite honest with you, because I've talked to so many people who have left, like say, obviously pre-pandemic they were obviously on site, and then pandemic, they're all remote. And then, some of those people left cities like New York or LA because they no longer need to be on location. So they found, and maybe they moved into the, deep into the, remote areas of the state or in the country. And now they're being forced to move back to those locations where, life is more affordable, or more expensive, I should say. And do you think that that is going to last, or do you think that this is something that some of these companies are really looking for to kind of get into again?
I mean, I don't know if this is controversial, but I find it not surprising that these big tech companies are forcing people to go back into office. I think that they've invested a lot of money into the real estate, into their campuses. I mean, Google has a big campus, and I have
Hmm.
friends who work at these top tech companies, and I don't find it surprising, just because I imagine that, like, I find it interesting that they are, a lot of them I think are hybrid, right? Like Apple's
Hmm.
hybrid. I think Amazon, you have to get, is also hybrid. Um, I think, I don't know if Facebook is all in person, but um, I I don't think that these tech companies are going to go back to fully remote. I think they're going to try to force people to come into office every day if they can. But I think the more realistic situation is that they're just going to maintain hybrid, where it's like come into office 2, 3 times a week. Um,
Hmm.
and but like from the people who are working hybrid, I've heard that they actually enjoy doing that.
Yeah.
There's people who love going into office, and I'm just not one of those people. So I think maybe because there are people who find that they're more productive, they find that it's possible to try to force people to come into work, because they're willing to do that. But I don't see these tech companies going back to remote anytime soon.
Yeah, and I would agree with that as well. And I think, and some people, they love that camaraderie of the office lifestyle, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I always catch myself, because it's like the remote work isn't for everybody as well. But I think for the people that actually want, and I talk about it because it's more, freedom based, location freedom and time
Yeah.
freedom, that, you know that commute. Like, I don't feel like if people don't want to make that 2 hour commute, or
Oh my
you
gosh.
know
Yeah.
it's insane. So I think those are your most optimized hours. So I think, if you don't want to have that ability, there should be that. I hope that there's more companies that will come out and be like, we are remote first. And I've actually had the pleasure of having, some of the top remote friendly companies on the podcast, and their head of HR talent, talking about like that they'll never have an office because they've been remote since day one. I love that Spotify also said that, we are remote first, and we are not going to call people back. If they want to come back to the office, they can. I love that, because I think that it gives it's just going to make culture better, because people are actually in the environment that they desire to be in. And if they want to be remote, they can be remote. And if they are working in the office, and, they want that camaraderie, and they like that, having that culture, that, the cafeteria talk, all that kind of stuff, water cooler talk, they can. But if they also want to take 3 months off and go travel and live in Mexico City, or come to Da Nang, Vietnam, they can also do that as well. And I think that that just adds to the culture of some of the companies. And I applaud a lot of those companies that are doing that. Um, but I think that, I've talked a lot about that stuff on the podcast, and I really hope that we start to see more of that, because at some point, you know, we want to make sure that people are going to perform at their best self. And I think that that's the best way to do it, is allow people to kind of have their best optimized work environment. But obviously when we first kind of met in that coffee shop, obviously I asked if you were a content creator. And so I want to kind of maybe find out how that journey started, because we've talked a lot about how you got to the point of being remote, but what started the content creating and kind of going along that journey? And what skills have you really learned about creating content and throwing yourself out there? Because a lot of people think it's terrifying, and for some people it is, and some people it's not. So maybe just take me through that journey of yourself.
Yeah, totally. So in, I want to say 2011, basically in high school, I've always watched YouTube. Like it was, I mean, early generation YouTube, when YouTube first came out, was like such a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so innocent at the time. And so when I got to college, I started creating a YouTube channel. I was unfortunately not consistent with it. I always had like this like desire to create content and just like I don't even know, create silly videos on YouTube. When I was going through college, I did not stay consistent with it, so it fell off. And then I started back up again several times when I was working in corporate, trying to do, you know, some videos around like restaurants. And then a few years later, I was like, okay, let me just like start, you know, recording my trips around. And some of the videos on my TikTok like did really well. Like I have a couple videos of like restaurant reviews that I would do that like hit over like 100K views. And I thought to myself, you know, I should really try to take this seriously, or at least just like see what I can do. So I started just basically committing to myself that I'm going to treat this like a full-time job, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to go out there, mic myself up, have a script, just literally walk out with my tripod and just record. Even if I think that the video is not the best video, I think this is like the biggest blocker for me, is that I wouldn't call myself a perfectionist at all to that respect, but I do have like a criteria for like, is a video good or worth it? Like worth putting up? Like, do I think that this is a good enough video? And I think even if it's not like the best video that I create, I think it's important for me to push it out, because it's the only way for me to be able to learn what I can do better, but also not
Mm-hmm.
waste the time that I spent and disrespect the time that I spent putting the effort into it. I come off as very extroverted. I think a lot of people think I'm very extroverted. I can be very introverted. I have social anxiety. I'm neurodivergent. But like when it comes to like creating content, at first it was very scary, right? I would be super shy about like taking photos, but then I noticed how it would feel afterwards when I didn't take those photos or videos, is I would feel really bad about myself. I'd be telling myself like, why didn't I just not care and like take that video or
Mm-hmm.
photo? And I noticed that this type of feeling was becoming a more consistent issue. And so at one point I decided, you know, like I should just do it. And so I started doing it a little bit more. I started taking photos. Um, Within the last like couple months is when I have been taking video more seriously, where I actually have like a script and I'm out carrying my tripod, and you attract a lot more attention. When I was in Taiwan, everyone loved the fact that I was filming. Business owners wanted me to come into their store. It was so much fun. And I think that type of level of energy is what encourages me to want to do it more. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and like people, I don't know why, but like when I'm recording, people love to come in and just say hi or talk to you about like how they really like, you know, that I'm doing this. So it's interesting to see how people respond. Of course, there's some people who are like, oh, this is so weird, or like, you know, this is annoying. But um, one of the things I like to tell myself, and how I've kind of been living my life more within the past 2 years, is like, if I were, this might be a little bit morbid, FYI, but if I were to die tomorrow, could I look back at my life and ask myself, like, do I regret anything? And I
Yeah.
think this type of mindset, for me at least, helps a lot, because then whatever fear I have about doing something, I just ask myself that question. Like, if I were to die tomorrow, would I want to do this? Then it just pushes me to do that thing. Because to your original point of how you started this episode, right, is, you know, life can feel very long, but in reality it's super short. And so if you're not pursuing your passion, or you're pursuing something that you actually have been wanting to do, because, for me, it's been like almost 10-15 years that I've wanted to do this. Like, why is it taking so long? I might as well just do it now. So I kind of like frame myself in my mind in that way.
And it's and you said, and it's even though the whole morbid thing, it's I like that you actually brought that up, because one of my previous guests, and I'll shout out Derek Skoll here, because he came on my podcast and we talked about that. We talked a lot about like Dr. Joe Dispenza and everything. He's done work with him. And one of the things that he had said is write your own obituary.
Oh, that is so good. I'm totally going to do that.
Write your own obituary. And I'm going to shout out Derek again, because Derek said this on my podcast and it got a really good response from people. Is when you write your own obituary, you get to look back and like, are you happy with what people would talk about? Or obituary or eulogy, whatever one it is, you write that out for yourself, and you look back and be like, have you done everything and that you wanted to do, or is the legacy you're leaving behind, or do you want to be known as that person that like said that you were going to do something and then never followed through, or do you want to be that person that said you were going to do something and you did it, even if it didn't work, but you still did it? Yes. You know what I mean? Like, I think like, and so that's stuck with me ever since Derek told me that. And I've thought about that too, because like I thought about it in ways when I started acting, when I quit my sales career just before 30, and then going and spending, 8 years, living in Vancouver, working and pursuing acting, I wasn't young anymore. Like, well, I was still young, but I wasn't young. And I was like almost starting over. And I looked at myself back then and thinking like, look, do I want, whatever happens, it's going to be a great freaking story. Like, I'm going to have an amazing story to tell my kids that, hey, you know what? Like, your dad went for it. Like I left and I pushed myself forward to try to give myself an opportunity. And I still worked on professional sets. I had some pretty good prominent roles. I was really happy with what I was able to accomplish. And there was just things that I don't consider myself failing at it. I just decided that it wasn't for me anymore. It wasn't fulfilling to me anymore. And it's not like I quit because I didn't get to where I wanted to be. I quit because I wanted something different. And so when I look back on that, I can at least look back and say, and if I take Derek's advice, I'm happy with that. It's not like I'm not going to look back and be like, oh, I wish I didn't quit. It's like, no, actually, to be quite honest with you, since I've left acting, I've traveled 16 countries, and in a pretty short period of time, and have got to experience the world in a completely different way, and not be so sheltered to one location. And so I think that you have to look back and really, really think about, like, was it worth it? Are the decisions that you make, are they worth it? Are you taking a risk? And I feel like risks are when you actually win at life.
1,000%.
So because if you take a risk, no matter what, you've won, because you're going to learn something, whether it's like the outcome you're looking for or not. You've learned something truly valuable that you're going to be able to take with you for the rest of your life. And I look back on that and I think that it's very important to learn those hard lessons and put yourself out there. And I applaud people that put themselves out there in content and whatnot, because it's hard. It's really hard. But it's meant to be hard. It's meant to challenge you and push you to the limit. Like, starting a podcast definitely wasn't easy. I'm sure starting a YouTube channel or a social media page that is directed to one thing, it's also not easy, because you have to learn so many different things. So like how many skills did you have to learn in terms of like video editing, or do you have somebody that does that for you, or like have you just kind of like went through that journey yourself? I know that you're like the creative type, as you mentioned earlier, but how much more fun has that been to just kind of tap into that creative side of yourself, but also adventurous side? And let's be real, there's a business side to it too that you also have from your career. So you're kind of like putting all these different things together and you're creating this thing that is, eventually going to turn into magic. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, totally. And I think I'm more of like a business operations person. So the creative side for
Mm-hmm.
me has been a little difficult, because I think when you're, at least for me, when, I'm trying to create content, I'm trying to figure out the best way of like filming. So I have to film, direct, edit. Editing is a little bit easy because I kind of already have a vision just based off of videos that I like, how I want a video to be seen, or like I kind of use my own ADHD and ask myself, am I paying attention to this video? Do I think this video is interesting? But where I struggle the most is, content ideas. Like, what do people want to see? Like, how am I able to understand like what people are more interested in? Execution, I think, is a lot more easier for me because I think I'm someone who can just execute really, really well. You give me something, I
Mm-hmm.
can just do it. But it's actually the creative part of like ideation for content specifically that is a little bit more of a struggle for me. But yeah, when I don't have a team, I do everything by myself. I literally, sometimes I have friends who help me. Like just yesterday morning, I had a partnership with an Airbnb experience, and so I was filming the entire tour, and like she was able to like help me with some angles, and she's also a content creator herself, so it was just nice to kind of like be able to bounce off ideas. But I'm often walking around with a tripod, and like I
Yeah.
have a DJI, so I have this mic, and like talking to a camera and like trying to understand like in advance how am I going to make this editing experience a lot more better for me when I have to like edit this video. So you start to pick up quite a few tricks up your sleeves. But I pretty much had to learn, and when I want to learn a new skill that has to relate to video editing or filming or content creation, I literally watch videos on how other people do it and try to like
Mm-hmm.
absorb as much as I can. But you know, um, everyone has their own style, so I think it's important to take what you can get from those videos and then try to curate it for yourself and see how you can um, make it work for you.
100%. And I think like just getting started, and I always tell people like it's never too late. If anything, like they're always like, "Oh, it's, I have to wait for this. I got to do this." It's like, the best time is literally just throwing, no matter how much preparation you put into your first video, it's going to suck compared to where you're going to be 6 months from now and a
Yep.
year from now. And it's like, you might as well just suck right away and
Yep.
just like get it out of the way. Cause like it's a night and day difference. And I'm sure, and as, the artistic types like us, where we've spent time in, the arts community. I mean, I look back on my first go in acting, and to where I was 8 years later, even 6 months after, and every year you're kind of redefining who you are and your skill sets just get better and better. It's the same thing with content. It's the same thing with putting yourself out there for getting a remote job, and or like somebody wants to get into copywriting or becoming a virtual assistant, becoming a language coach. Like everything happens at the speed that it goes at, and as long as you just keep getting better, that's what it's all about. And I
Yeah.
think people need to realize that. So um but no, I think that we look back on our journeys, and you know how grateful we are to be able to just pursue the passion of being creative, traveling, but also working full time at the same time. Now, if you could do anything different in your journey, going back to the very beginning, is there anything that you would have changed?
I would probably say I wish I started sooner and I wish I stayed consistent. Um,
Yeah.
I think and it starts with, it goes with anything, right? When you start something new and you don't see, I'm someone who likes to see instant gratification with results, right? So it's
Hmm.
like, if I'm not seeing results immediately, I start to feel like a failure and I start to give up. I'm like, okay, well, what's the point of me doing this? Maybe I'm not doing it right. But I think most successes are due to the fact that they've been consistent. And I think
Hmm.
that if I were to go back to my 2013-year-old self, and if I was interested in like doing YouTube at the time, and I was consistent with it, I think I probably would have been, a lot further than where I am today. Um, and I think, I mean, this is not to say like it's a regret, but anyone who is like watching this and like, I think your biggest thing that you have is time, and
Hmm.
the longer you wait, you might end up losing that time. So, that's probably the only thing I wish I did differently.
Yeah, I like that. That's so powerful in so many different ways too, because you're right. With the you can have is so many things of one thing, but there's one thing that you're limited to, and that's time, and you just don't know when that time runs out. And I
Yeah.
think that's a really precious, valuable thing for a lot of people, and we don't realize that. And actually, that still ties back, into that quote. Like life does move at you pretty fast, and if you don't stop to look around once in a while, you could miss it. And
Hmm.
so many people live in that rat race where it's just like they want that nice new house, they want that nice car, but they don't realize that there's so many more important things to life than just having those simple those materialistic things. um so I think that's really interesting too. And if you could would you give any advice what would you give to the advice to those people that are listening that are still like kind of like I don't know where to start. I want to I want to work remotely. I want to travel, but I don't know where to start, whether that's starting my own business, getting a remote job, changing careers. What's your advice to them?
Yeah, I'd probably say is to find someone that you look up to and ask them for help, or ask them like what they would do if they were in your situation. When I first became an entrepreneur, um, I literally reached out to business owners because I was like, I don't know how to start a business. And I would just interview them and like ask them on a casual basis. And they just kind of like talk me through their thinking. And I think the best thing to do is that if you don't know what to do, go to someone who is doing what you love and ask them what they did. And try to kind of build yourself a template. It doesn't have to be exact step by step, but at least you
Hmm.
can kind of get some sort of idea of like, okay, if this was their first step, and if I spoke to like 10 other content creators and they all took the same step, maybe that's the first step I need to take.
Hmm.
That's kind of what my approach was. um, but that's also, if someone's not like that, where they don't want to feel comfortable, I'd probably say there's tons of content, right? Like you have amazing content on how to get people to be where they want to be. So I think watching content is like really important, and maybe even like being very specific about what you want to do. That's a good starting point.
Yeah, and I think and there's so much free content out there, and I think too, and I like some of the people that I look up to. Obviously, I've paid for coaches, I've paid for things to help me get to that next level. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, I mean, I know Alex Hormozy, you know, he talks about how um, if you want to get to a certain dollar figure, you have to be willing to invest that much time and almost that much money over the course of your career to get to that point. Um, and I mean, I don't necessarily fully agree with that, but I know that you have to be willing to put in that time aspect and or at least get in front of people that have that experience. And if it costs you, you know, $2,000 to go to a Tony Robbins event to just like shape shift your mind a little bit, there's no harm in that. I think it's because I think the biggest thing is where people give up is when they give up when it gets too hard. And I think
Yeah.
that's the biggest thing is when it gets hard, they need to be able to sit back and realize like, look, like it's meant to be hard. And when it's hard, it's mean I'm learning something new. And that when you can break through that hard moment, it's going to really set you apart. And it's but that also comes with the consistency too, right? Like the more you do it, the easier it's going to be. But last question, obviously, I ask a lot of people this is travel hack. Like, if you've traveled a lot, I'm sure you've got a couple hacks, whether that's like a hack on how you find flights, hack on like something that you always need to have when you're traveling. What's like your number one travel hack that makes traveling just so much more easier for you?
So I don't know if this is a hack, but I personally feel like it's worth the investment, whatever the investment might be, to be able to have uh, the ability to go into lounges at airports. I'm
Yeah.
a huge lounge girly, and so I have priority pass. So that's what I mean by investment, right? Like you can have a credit card that pays for that
Yeah.
for the priority pass. So I have TSA and priority pass, and global entry. I used to have Clear. I would say if you're in the States and you travel a lot within the States, Clear is a really good investment. I discontinued it now because I don't go back to the States very often. But TSA, global entry, and priority pass, I think, are like the best ways, at least for me, on travel because if there's like really long lines, you can avoid them. Priority pass lounges. I mean, it's not like sometimes you get a lounge that's not as premium, but like the fact that you're in a lounge, I think is great because then you don't have to spend money on like the really expensive airport food. You could just enjoy the free food that you have there. And
Mhm.
Delta has like really good lounges. Like I absolutely love the New York, the JFK Delta Lounge. And then global entry, if you're ever going back to the States, that process is so, I don't know if you have global entry, but global entry is so nice. You just, or I guess global entry is a US thing. But global
Yeah.
entry, you just show your face and then you just leave the airport. It's so nice. So I guess those, at least for me as a US citizen, are so
Yeah,
nice.
in Canada would be Nexus card.
Okay.
Yeah, Nexus, and I think it's only valid for Canada. And when you come in, well, I don't know if it's valid when you come into Canada. It's valid. It's for Canadians coming into the U.S. and then coming
Okay.
from the U.S. into Canada. You avoid that line. You have a Nexus line where it's just like they scan your face. But on top of that, we had a really, really, really amazing, easy experience. Have you been to Malaysia yet?
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
how easy was it to get into Malaysia? Like I was in, landed, out of the door, out of the airport in like 4 minutes from my gate. I didn't have any carry-on bags. It was all, but in and out in 4 minutes. Literally just off the plane. I scanned my passport. I didn't talk to anybody. They scanned my face, and I was done. Like that was it. It was super quick.
Yeah.
Very
It is
probably
super
very
quick.
similar to what you were talking about.
You should go. I think Taiwan. I think it was Taiwan that has a very similar process, but I think
Yeah.
Taiwan was even faster for me. I was shocked. I was like, oh my god, this is so
Yeah.
quick. Like,
It's
I mean,
efficient.
it's so interesting how the technology that Asia has compared to the U.S. and maybe Canada, right? It's just the process is just so there's such a huge difference between the processes. Like,
Yeah.
I just find it so insane.
It is. It's very different. It's very, very, very different. And it's actually kind of like a breath of fresh air too. Even getting into Bali was pretty simple. It was just have to fill out your documents. You pre-fill them out obviously because it makes things so much easier. But then it's just scan your passport. You're in and out.
Yeah.
Longest part was waiting for my luggage there, but yeah, no, this has been incredible. So obviously I want to be able to give you the floor here to also let everybody know where they can find your content, reach out, maybe LinkedIn as well. Like just
Yeah.
give us like all your content here. I'll obviously post it below, but give you that floor for yourself to tell us.
Yeah, thank you. Well, you can all find me on Instagram, TikTok, Red Note even, and YouTube at Kimberly Bueno. And then on LinkedIn, same thing. Kimberly Bueno is my full
Perfect.
name. So yeah.
Amazing. And I'll post all the links down below for everybody to reach out. Kimberly, this has been awesome.
This is so great.
I'd love to actually extend the invitation to do this again sometime.
Yeah,
And
we should.
because I feel like the values and everything, just the similar path, it's so aligning in a lot of ways that I think it would be such a cool chance to maybe just follow your journey as well and just bring you back on and just touch base in the job market. I think we could talk about the job market in the professional field so much more, but also
Oh
even
yeah.
talk about other avenues. I think there's so many different conversations that we could have, and I'd love to do this again. So if you're up for it, we can definitely cross that path again.
Of course, of course. I would love to.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And just want to also tell everybody, that quote again, because if life moves at you pretty fast, and if you don't stop to look around once in a while, you could miss it. That's why people like Kimberly and I, and all the other nomads in the world, they're doing what they love to do. They're seeing the world. They're doing it on their own time, and they're making money while they're doing it, whether that's remote work or starting a business. It's not rocket science. It's actually a lot easier than you think, and you're closer than you think. You just have to start at some point and just go for it, and just really don't look back, and start small and work towards it, and eventually things will just fall into place for you. Thank you so much, you guys. I've got obviously let you know that my free course is obviously up there in the link below. Mindset to Momentum, your map to becoming a digital nomad. It's not also just about being a nomad. If you want to just be a freedom, location independent, just having more time for yourself, whether that's just being home with the kids during the week and not having to make that long commute to the office. Definitely look at that course. It is something that could definitely benefit you. There's no cost whatsoever to it. Definitely have a look, and I can't wait to see your guys' results, and reach out if you have any questions. Thank you, everybody. Be brave, be bold. We'll see you on the road. Cheers.